The grand halls of Windsor Castle echoed with whispered conversations as Prince Charles walked through the corridors that had become his second home. At 32, he carried the weight of royal expectations on his shoulders, yet something felt missing in his carefully orchestrated life. The morning sun streamed through ancient windows, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the emptiness he felt inside. Camilla Parker Bowles had been a constant presence in his world for years. Their relationship had grown comfortable, predictable even. She understood the pressures of royal life, the endless ceremonies and the suffocating protocol that governed every moment of his existence. When they were together, Charles found a sense of familiarity that felt like coming home after a long journey. Camilla made him laugh with her sharp wit and clever observations about the people they encountered at royal functions. Their conversations flowed easily during long walks through the countryside. She would point out birds in the trees and share stories from her childhood that made Charles forget, momentarily, about his royal duties. In those quiet moments when the world wasn't watching, Charles believed he had found his partner for life. Camilla seemed to accept him exactly as he was, without trying to change or mold him into someone else's vision of what a prince should be. The royal family had grown accustomed to seeing Camilla at various events. She moved through social gatherings with grace and confidence, never appearing overwhelmed by the grandeur surrounding her. Her presence brought Charles a sense of stability that he had rarely experienced in his adult life. When photographers captured them together, there was an ease between them that spoke of deep friendship and mutual understanding. Charles often found himself thinking about their future together. In his mind, he could picture quiet evenings by the fireplace, sharing books and discussing philosophy late into the night. Camilla appreciated his interest in architecture and organic farming, subjects that many found tedious but sparked passionate conversations between them. She listened intently when he spoke about his vision for modernizing certain royal traditions while maintaining the dignity of the monarchy. The comfort of their relationship had become Charles's anchor in the stormy seas of public life. Every royal appearance, every speech, every ceremonial duty felt more manageable knowing that Camilla understood the pressures he faced. She had seen him at his most vulnerable moments and never judged him for the doubts that sometimes crept into his mind about his role as heir to the throne. Their shared experiences had created a bond that Charles treasured. From quiet dinners at country estates to formal state functions, Camilla had proven herself capable of adapting to any situation the royal lifestyle demanded. Her intelligence and social skills made her an asset in diplomatic circles, where conversations required both wit and discretion. As spring approached, Charles felt confident about the direction his personal life was taking. The relationship with Camilla represented everything he thought he wanted in a partner. She was sophisticated, understanding, and completely at ease in his world. The future seemed clear and uncomplicated, with a path that led toward marriage and a life built on shared values and mutual respect. Yet somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered questions that Charles tried to ignore. Was comfort enough? Was compatibility the same as passion? These thoughts came and went like shadows, never staying long enough for him to examine them closely. After all, he reasoned, fairy tale romance was for storybooks, not for future kings who needed stable, suitable partnerships. The royal calendar was filling up with spring events, and Charles looked forward to having Camilla by his side as they navigated the social season together. Everything in his life seemed to be falling into place according to plan, and he felt grateful for the certainty that their relationship provided in an otherwise unpredictable world. The charity gala at the Natural History Museum was supposed to be another routine royal engagement for Charles. He had attended dozens of similar events, each one blending into the next with polite conversations, ceremonial speeches, and carefully choreographed photo opportunities. As he stepped out of the royal car that evening, adjusting his formal jacket, Charles expected nothing more than another predictable evening of royal duties. The museum's grand entrance hall buzzed with activity as London's elite mingled. Among the ancient artifacts and towering dinosaur skeletons, crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the gathering, and the sound of classical music drifted through the air. Charles moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands and making small talk with various dignitaries and wealthy donors who had come to support the children's charity. Then, across the crowded room, he saw her. Lady Diana Spencer stood near a display case, her blonde hair catching the light as she listened intently to an elderly gentleman explaining something about the museum's collection. She wore a simple but elegant navy dress that somehow managed to look both appropriate and refreshingly different from the overly formal gowns worn by most of the other female guests. What struck Charles immediately wasn't just her beauty, though she was undeniably lovely. It was the way she carried herself with a combination of grace and genuine warmth that seemed to light up the space around her. When she laughed at something the elderly man said, the sound was musical and completely unguarded, unlike the carefully modulated responses Charles was accustomed to hearing at royal functions. As the evening progressed, Charles found his attention repeatedly drawn to Diana. He watched as she moved through the crowd, stopping to chat with people from all walks of life. She seemed equally comfortable talking to museum staff as she did with members of Parliament. There was something refreshingly authentic about her interactions that made Charles realize how scripted most royal conversations had become in his own life. When they were finally introduced later in the evening, Diana's handshake was firm and her smile genuine. Her eyes met his directly, without the usual mixture of awe and calculation he had grown accustomed to seeing in people's faces when they met him. She treated him like a person rather than a royal title, asking thoughtful questions about his work with various charities and listening carefully to his answers. Their conversation flowed naturally as they discussed the evening's cause, a program supporting disadvantaged children in London. Diana spoke passionately about her own volunteer work with young people, her face lighting up as she described helping children learn to read or organizing activities for those in hospitals. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Charles found himself sharing stories about his own charitable interests with more animation than he had felt in years. What surprised Charles most was how easy it felt to talk with Diana. There were no awkward silences or forced topics of conversation. She asked genuine questions and shared her own thoughts without seeming to calculate the royal protocol implications of every word. When she disagreed with something he said about education policy, she did so respectfully but directly, treating him as an equal rather than deferring automatically to his position. As the evening drew to a close, Charles realized he had spent nearly an hour in conversation with Diana, completely forgetting about his other obligations at the event. His security detail had been discreetly managing his schedule around this unexpected extended conversation, but Charles hadn't even noticed the time passing. It had been years since he had become so absorbed in talking with someone new. When Diana excused herself to say goodbye to other guests, Charles watched her move through the room with that same natural warmth she had shown him. She took time to thank the museum staff, complimented the organizers on their work, and even stopped to help an elderly woman who had dropped her purse near the exit. These small gestures weren't performed for show or because protocol demanded them, but seemed to flow naturally from who Diana was as a person. Walking back to his car that night, Charles felt something he couldn't quite identify stirring within him. The evening had been different somehow, charged with an energy that had nothing to do with royal duty or social obligation. For the first time in months, he found himself genuinely excited about the possibility of seeing someone again, not because it was scheduled or expected, but because he simply wanted to continue the conversation they had started. The weeks following the museum gala brought an unexpected shift in Charles's daily routine. Where once his thoughts had been occupied with duty rosters and official engagements, he now found himself wondering when he might encounter Diana Spencer again. The memory of their conversation lingered in his mind like a favorite song he couldn't stop humming. His relationship with Camilla continued as before, with their regular dinners and countryside walks. Yet something fundamental had changed in Charles's perception of these familiar moments. Conversations that had once felt deeply satisfying now seemed to lack a certain spark. Camilla's wit remained as sharp as ever, and her understanding of royal life as complete. But Charles caught himself comparing her responses to the genuine enthusiasm Diana had shown at the museum. During a quiet evening at Camilla's country home, as they sat reading by the fireplace in comfortable silence, Charles realized he was restless in a way that had nothing to do with his royal responsibilities. The contentment he had always found in these peaceful moments felt somehow incomplete now. When Camilla looked up from her book and smiled at him, Charles smiled back automatically, but part of his mind wandered to memories of Diana's animated expressions when she spoke about helping children, the Opportunity to see Diana again came sooner than expected when Charles learned she would be attending a polo match at Windsor. The prospect of this meeting filled him with an anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. He found himself paying extra attention to his appearance that morning, choosing his clothes with more care than usual and even checking his reflection twice before leaving his rooms. At the polo grounds, the atmosphere was relaxed and festive. Spectators gathered on the grass with picnic baskets and champagne, enjoying the spring sunshine and the excitement of the match. Charles spotted Diana almost immediately among the crowd. She was wearing a light blue dress that complemented her complexion perfectly, and her hair moved gently in the breeze as she watched the horses thunder across the field. When their eyes met across the gathering, Diana's face broke into a warm smile that made Charles's heart skip unexpectedly. She waved in his direction, and without thinking, he began making his way through the crowd toward her. The usual protocol of waiting for people to approach him seemed irrelevant in that moment. Their reunion felt as natural as if they had been friends for years rather than having met just weeks before. Diana congratulated him on a particularly impressive play during the match, and Charles found himself explaining the finer points of polo with genuine enthusiasm rather than the dutiful patience he usually employed when discussing his interests with others. As they walked together along the sidelines, Charles discovered that Diana had a remarkable ability to ask questions that drew out aspects of his personality he rarely shared with others. She wanted to know what he loved most about riding, what drew him to polo specifically, and whether he had always been comfortable with horses. Her curiosity seemed genuine rather than merely polite, and Charles found himself opening up about childhood memories of learning to ride and the sense of freedom he found on horseback. Diana shared stories of her own, experiences with horses during her childhood, visits to her father's estate. Her tales were filled with humor and self-deprecating observations about her early attempts at riding that made Charles laugh out loud. It struck him that he had been laughing more in the past hour than he had in weeks of social engagements with other people. When the afternoon began to wind down, Charles felt reluctant to see Diana leave. The time had passed so quickly that he could hardly believe several hours had gone by. As other guests began gathering their belongings and saying their farewells, Charles realized he wanted to extend their conversation, to find a reason to spend more time together. Almost without thinking, he heard himself asking if Diana would be interested in joining him for a private dinner the following week. The invitation surprised even him with its spontaneity, as he rarely made such personal arrangements without considerable advance planning. Diana's immediate acceptance, her eyes lighting up with what appeared to be genuine pleasure at the prospect, sent a warm feeling through Charles that he recognized but hadn't felt in years. As Diana said her goodbyes and walked toward her car, Charles watched her go with a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty that was both thrilling and unsettling. The familiar routines of his life suddenly seemed filled with new possibilities, and for the first time in memory, he found himself counting the days until a personal engagement, rather than simply checking it off his royal calendar. The private dinner with Diana took place at a small, exclusive restaurant in Belgravia that Charles had chosen specifically for its discretion and intimate atmosphere. Away from the crowds and cameras that usually surrounded royal outings, he felt a freedom he rarely experienced. The soft candlelight and quiet conversation of other diners created a perfect backdrop for what he hoped would be an evening of genuine connection. Diana arrived looking radiant in a simple but elegant black dress, her natural beauty enhanced by the warm glow of the restaurant's lighting. As she was seated across from him, Charles felt a nervous excitement he hadn't experienced since his university days. The usual confidence that came with his royal training seemed to desert him momentarily, replaced by the genuine nervousness of a man hoping to impress someone who truly mattered to him. Their conversation began tentatively, as if both were aware that this evening represented something different from their previous casual encounters. But as the wine was poured and the first course arrived, the natural ease that had characterized their earlier meetings returned. Diana asked about his recent travels, and Charles found himself sharing not just the official details of his diplomatic missions, but his personal observations about the people he had met and the places that had moved him. What struck Charles most profoundly was Diana's ability to listen. She didn't simply wait for her turn to speak or offer polite acknowledgments of his stories. Instead, she engaged deeply with what he was telling her, asking follow-up questions that showed she was genuinely interested in his experiences and perspectives. When he described his visit to a struggling community in Wales, Diana leaned forward, her eyes bright with concern as she asked about the specific challenges the people faced. As the evening progressed, Charles began to understand that Diana possessed a rare combination of intelligence and compassion that drew people to her naturally. She spoke about her work with children and the elderly with a passion that was unmistakably authentic. Her stories weren't calculated to impress him or to demonstrate her suitability as a royal consort, but flowed from a genuine desire to make a difference in people's lives. The contrast with his relationship with Camilla became impossible to ignore. While Camilla understood royal life and could navigate its complexities with skill, Diana brought something entirely different to the table. She challenged him to think beyond protocol and tradition, to consider how the monarchy could better serve ordinary people. Her questions about his role as future king weren't about ceremony or precedence, but about impact and purpose. When Diana laughed at his stories about the more absurd aspects of royal protocol, Charles felt a lightness he had forgotten was possible. Her laughter wasn't polite or measured, but genuine and infectious. She had a way of finding humor in situations that others might find intimidating or overwhelming, and her perspective helped Charles see his own world through fresh eyes. As dessert was served, their conversation turned to more personal topics. Diana spoke about her childhood, her family, and her dreams for the future with an openness that both surprised and touched Charles. She didn't seem to be auditioning for the role of princess, but simply sharing herself as she would with any friend. Her vulnerability in discussing her insecurities and hopes made Charles want to protect and cherish her in a way he had never felt before. The evening stretched late into the night, with neither seeming eager to bring it to an end. When Charles finally walked Diana to her car, the London streets were quiet and peaceful around them. Standing on the sidewalk under the soft glow of the streetlights, Charles felt as if he were seeing the city where he had lived his entire life for the first time. As Diana thanked him for the lovely evening, Charles found himself reaching for her hand. The simple contact sent electricity through him, and when she didn't pull away, he felt a rush of emotion that was both thrilling and terrifying. In that moment, standing on a quiet London street with Diana's hand in his, Charles understood that something fundamental had shifted in his world. The drive back to his residence passed in a blur of conflicted thoughts and racing emotions. Charles knew that pursuing a relationship with Diana would complicate his life in ways he was only beginning to understand. His relationship with Camilla, his royal duties, the expectations of his family and the public. All of these would need to be reconsidered in light of what he was feeling. But as he lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, Charles found that all the practical considerations paled in comparison to the memory of Diana's smile and the sound of her laughter echoing in his mind. Camilla noticed the change in Charles before he was fully aware of it himself. During their regular Thursday evening dinner at her London flat, she observed how his attention seemed to drift even during their most engaging conversations. His responses, while still thoughtful, lacked the focused intensity she had grown accustomed to over their years together. The realization came gradually. Like watching storm clouds gather on a distant horizon, Charles still arrived promptly for their scheduled meetings, still called when he said he would, still maintained all the courtesies and considerations that had always characterized their relationship. But something essential had shifted in the quality of his presence. Where once his full attention had been hers during their time together, now she sensed a part of him that remained elsewhere. At first, Camilla attributed the change to the increased pressures of his royal duties. Charles had always carried the weight of his responsibilities heavily, and she assumed this was simply another period of intense focus on his official obligations. She had learned over the years to give him space during such times, understanding that the demands of royal life sometimes required all of his emotional energy. But as weeks passed, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Charles's laughter, when it came, seemed to require more effort than before. Their conversations, while still pleasant, felt as though they were taking place across a greater distance than the width of her sitting room. Even their comfortable silences, which had once felt intimate and companionable, now carried an undercurrent of something unspoken. The first concrete sign came when Charles mentioned Diana Spencer in passing during one of their conversations. He had been describing a charity event when her name came up naturally in the context of other attendees. But Camilla, who had learned to read the subtle changes in Charles's voice and manner over their long relationship, caught something in his tone that made her pay closer attention. It wasn't what Charles said about Diana that alerted Camilla, but how he said it. There was a warmth in his voice when he spoke her name, a slight animation that hadn't been there when discussing other people at the event. The change was subtle enough that someone who knew Charles less well might have missed it entirely, but Camilla had spent years learning to interpret his every mood and manner. As she began to notice this pattern, Camilla found herself paying attention to the society pages and gossip columns in a way she never had before. When photographs appeared of Charles and Diana at various events, Camilla studied them with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. The images showed nothing improper or obviously romantic, but there was something in Charles's body language, in the way he leaned slightly toward Diana when they spoke, that told a story Camilla didn't want to acknowledge. The most painful moment came during a weekend they spent at her country house, their usual retreat from the pressures of London life. Charles had always found peace in the quiet routines of country living, the long walks through the gardens, the evenings spent reading by the fire, but this weekend, even in their most cherished sanctuary, Camilla could feel his restlessness. On Saturday evening, as they sat together after dinner, Charles's phone rang. Camilla watched his face light up when he glanced at the caller identification, saw the immediate way he excused himself to take the call privately. Through the partly open door to the next room, she could hear the animated tone of his voice, could catch fragments of laughter that sounded more genuine than any she had heard from him in weeks. When Charles returned to the sitting room 20 minutes later, he seemed different, energized in a way that their quiet evening together hadn't achieved. He made excuses about the call being related to a charity project, but Camilla noticed how he avoided meeting her eyes directly as he spoke. The careful way he chose his words told her more than any confession would have. That night, lying awake in the bed they had shared so many times before, Camilla finally allowed herself to acknowledge what she had been trying to deny. Charles was falling in love with someone else. The knowledge settled over her like a cold weight, making it difficult to breathe normally. She had always known that their relationship existed somewhat outside the normal boundaries of royal expectations, but she had believed that their deep compatibility and understanding would ultimately prove stronger than any external pressures. The irony wasn't lost on her that Charles seemed to be discovering with Diana Spencer the kind of passionate connection that he and Camilla had never quite achieved. Their relationship had been built on friendship, mutual respect, and shared understanding of the complexities of royal life. It had been comfortable and satisfying in its own way, but perhaps it had never had the spark that Charles was evidently finding elsewhere. In the days that followed, Camilla began the painful process of stepping back, creating small distances that might make the inevitable transition easier for both of them. She started declining some of the invitations she would normally have accepted, finding reasons to be unavailable for a few of their regular meetings. The gradual withdrawal felt like slowly removing herself from a life she had expected to share permanently, each small step away from Charles requiring enormous strength and dignity. The transition from friendship to something deeper happened so naturally between Charles and Diana that neither could pinpoint exactly when it occurred. Their meetings became more frequent, moving from chance encounters at public events to deliberately planned private moments. Each conversation revealed new layers of compatibility and understanding that surprised them both with its depth and ease. Charles found himself sharing thoughts and feelings with Diana that he had never expressed to anyone else. Her ability to listen without judgment and respond with genuine insight made him feel truly understood for perhaps the first time in his adult life. When he spoke about the loneliness that sometimes accompanied his royal position, Diana didn't offer empty reassurances or try to minimize his feelings. Instead, she acknowledged the reality of his experience, while helping him see new perspectives on how he might use his unique position to create meaningful connections with others. Diana, in turn, discovered in Charles a man whose public persona had hidden depths of sensitivity and thoughtfulness that drew her to him completely. She had expected to find someone shaped entirely by royal protocol and tradition, but instead encountered a person who questioned, who worried, who hoped for ways to make his life's work more meaningful and impactful. His genuine concern for others, and his desire to use his privileges responsibly aligned perfectly with her own values and aspirations. Their first kiss happened during a quiet walk through the gardens at Highgrove, Charles's country home. They had been discussing a book they had both recently read, their conversation flowing as naturally as always, when Diana made an observation that struck Charles as so perfectly insightful that he stopped walking and turned to look at her directly. In that moment, seeing her face animated with intelligence and warmth, feeling the complete comfort of being truly known by another person, Charles found himself leaning toward her almost without conscious thought. The kiss was gentle and tentative at first, both of them aware that this moment would change everything between them. But as Diana responded with equal tenderness, Charles felt a sense of coming home that was entirely different from anything he had experienced before. When they finally stepped apart, the world around them seemed brighter and more full of possibility than it had moments before. In the weeks that followed, their relationship deepened with surprising speed. Charles discovered that love with Diana was nothing like the comfortable companionship he had known with Camilla. This was a connection that energized him, that made him feel more like himself than he had ever felt before. Diana challenged him intellectually while supporting him emotionally, creating a partnership that felt both exciting and secure. Diana, despite her youth, brought a wisdom to their relationship that constantly amazed Charles. She understood instinctively how to balance respect for his position with the equality that any real partnership required. She never deferred to him unnecessarily, but she also never used their private relationship to challenge royal protocol in ways that would create public difficulties. Her natural grace and intelligence made her an ideal companion for both his public duties and his private moments. The change in Charles was visible to everyone around him. His step was lighter, his smile more frequent and genuine. Even his approach to royal duties seemed infused with new energy and purpose. Staff members noticed that he laughed more often and seemed less burdened by the weight of his responsibilities. The transformation was so marked that even his most formal public appearances carried a warmth and authenticity that hadn't been there before. For Diana, falling in love with Charles opened up a world she had never imagined for herself. While the prospect of royal life brought its own challenges and concerns, the depth of her feelings for Charles made all other considerations secondary. She found herself naturally adapting to the requirements of his world, while maintaining her own identity and values. Her genuine interest in charitable work aligned perfectly with the opportunities that came with being closely associated with the royal family. Their private moments together became the anchor points of both their lives. Whether they were sharing quiet dinners, walking through gardens, or simply talking late into the evening, Charles and Diana created a space where both could be completely themselves. In these times, away from public scrutiny and royal protocol, their connection deepened into something that felt both passionate and enduring. As their relationship became more serious, both Charles and Diana began to envision a future together that seemed not only possible but inevitable. The challenges that lay ahead, the need to navigate family expectations and public opinion, all of these seemed manageable in the face of what they had found together. Their love had grown from friendship and mutual respect into something that felt strong enough to withstand whatever obstacles they might encounter. The contrast with Charles's previous relationship became impossible to ignore. Where once he had valued comfort and predictability, now he treasured the excitement and growth that came from being with someone who inspired him to become the best version of himself. The conversation with Camilla was one of the most difficult Charles had ever faced. He had postponed it for weeks, hoping to find the right words to express both his regret and his gratitude for everything they had shared. When he finally asked to see her privately, Camilla's quiet acceptance told him she had been expecting this moment for some time. They met at her London flat on a gray afternoon in early autumn, the familiar surroundings making the conversation somehow both easier and more painful. Charles had rehearsed various approaches to the topic, but when he looked into Camilla's eyes and saw the understanding already there, all his prepared speeches seemed inadequate. Instead, he found himself speaking simply and honestly about what had happened to him, about the unexpected way love had entered his life and changed everything. Camilla listened without interruption, her face calm and composed even as Charles struggled to find words that could adequately explain his feelings. When he finished speaking, she was quiet for a long moment before responding with a grace that both impressed and humbled him. She told him she had sensed the change in him and had already begun to understand what it meant for their future together. What struck Charles most deeply was Camilla's lack of bitterness or recrimination. She spoke about their years together with warmth and appreciation, acknowledging the genuine affection and compatibility they had shared while accepting that Charles had found something different with Diana. Her dignity in the face of what must have been devastating disappointment made Charles realize anew why he had cared for her so deeply and why this conversation was so painful. Camilla made the transition as easy for Charles as it could possibly be under the circumstances. She didn't demand explanations he couldn't give or ask for promises he couldn't make. Instead, she wished him happiness with a sincerity that spoke to the depth of her character and the genuine nature of her feelings for him. When they said goodbye that afternoon, both knew they were closing a chapter of their lives that had been meaningful and important, even though it was not destined to be the final one. In the months that followed, as Charles's relationship with Diana became more public and serious, Camilla maintained her dignity and privacy with remarkable consistency. She avoided speaking to the press about their former relationship and conducted herself at public events with the same grace she had always shown. Her behavior during this difficult period demonstrated the strength of character that had first drawn Charles to her, even as it highlighted the differences in what each relationship had brought to his life. The announcement of Charles and Diana's engagement came on a crisp February morning, their joint appearance before the cameras revealing a couple clearly deeply in love and excited about their future together. Diana's radiant smile and obvious happiness seemed to light up the screen, while Charles appeared more relaxed and genuine than the public had ever seen him. Their easy interaction during the brief interview that followed the announcement showed a couple who genuinely enjoyed each other's company and shared a vision for their life together. As preparations for the royal wedding began in earnest, Charles found himself marveling at how completely his life had been transformed. The future that had once seemed predictable and somewhat constrained now appeared full of exciting possibilities. Diana's influence on his approach to royal duties was already becoming apparent, as he embraced opportunities to connect more directly with the people they would serve together. Diana herself seemed to blossom in the months leading up to their wedding. Her natural warmth and genuine interest in others made her an immediate favorite with the public, while her intelligence and quick wit won over even the most traditional members of the royal establishment. She approached her new role with a combination of respect for tradition and fresh perspectives that promised to bring new energy to the monarchy. The wedding day itself was a celebration that captured the imagination of people around the world. As Charles watched Diana walk down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral, her beauty and grace taking his breath away, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the unexpected turns that had brought them together. The ceremony was both a public celebration and an intensely personal moment, marking the beginning of a partnership that felt full of promise and potential. In the years that followed, as Charles and Diana built their life together and started their family, the wisdom of following his heart became increasingly clear. Their relationship brought out the best in both of them, creating a royal partnership that combined duty with genuine affection, tradition with innovation, and public service with private happiness. The love that had begun so unexpectedly had grown into something that enriched not only their own lives but the institution they served together.